You lost someone.
My wife.
I lost everyone in one night.
He found a starving Apache child 4 days later. 3 Apache women came knocking at his door. Arizona Territory, winter of 1882. I didn't much care for the North Pass. The trail ran crooked through brittle brush and sun-bleached rock, always needing mending, always too far from the cabin to bother with unless something pushed me out there. A broken rock wall, an animal slipping the fence, or that gut pull that says something isn't right. That morning, it was the last one. I woke early, same as always, fed the mules, shouldered the shed door that never quite latched square, ground my coffee slow in the tin mill. The cabin rough timbers, one stovepipe, a roof patched with bark and hope, had stood quiet through the night. No visitors, no sound but the wind, yet something gnawed at me. I tried to ignore it, didn't take. So I rode northeast into a wind that cut through wool and canvas and went to work on the raw backs of my hand. The plains up there hide nothing except when they do. Years ago I learned to look for what's missing more than what's there. The absence of a quail flush, a silence where water ought to whisper, the shape that doesn't belong. That's what caught my eye at the east corner post, a low slump where the wire curled loose like a pulled thread. Could have been a blown feed sack, could have been a coyote the buzzards had worked on. I slid down, soil cracking under my boots, and went careful habit keeping my right palm near the colt, though my belly already knew it wasn't danger in that way. A boy lay there, Apache by the look, 5 or 6 at most, curled the way cold makes every creature into itself. Bare feet, fingers stiffing to purple, one cheek on the earth, lips split, thin deerskin shirt torn at the sleeve, ash from a dead campfire blown across his hair. Beside his hand, a thumb-sized beaded pouch, blue, bone, and red spilled a few dry sprigs into the dust. Somebody had tied that for him once. I don't mind saying I hesitated. Not from lack of care, the war burned most of that out of me, but from winter arithmetic. Another body eats, and the woodpile empties faster than a man thinks. The last body I'd held close was my wife, 6 years gone to fever that smelled of pine oil and prayers that broke against the rafters. Since then, it'd been the mules, the cattle, and quiet I chose. This wasn't a choice. I shrugged out of my coat canvas and wool, the thing that kept me honest through last winter, and wrapped it around him. He weighed near nothing when I lifted him, bones and breath. I turned once, scanning the flats for anyone with a claim. Nothing but wind. All right then, I muttered. It was about a quarter-mile back. I didn't rush it. Each hoofbeat set the decision deeper. By the time the cabin showed itself in the shallow of the draw, I knew this wasn't temporary. Inside, the stove still held some heart from the morning fire. I fed it cedar and cleared the cot by the heat. The chill came off him in slow waves, like creek ice softening at the edges. I warmed water, cleaned dirt from under small nails, counted bruises I didn't like counting. I set beans to simmer with fat and salt, thinned the broth and held a tin cup to his mouth. He swallowed. Enough for a start. I stayed on the floor a while, knees talking the way they do since '64, a hand resting easy on his shoulder, not to soothe exactly, but to keep myself honest that there was another set of lungs in my house. Night went long and bright with wind. He woke once to a dry cough, and didn't cry. I put another stick on and watched flame take. No plan. Just the stubborn fact that he wasn't going to die where I could see it. Day peeled off the dark without color. He ate little and slept more. I split wood, fixed the hinge, walked the close fence, counted cattle with a thumb to each work I'd learned to do without thinking, and put an extra plate out because that's what the day required. When he was awake, he watched me the way a half-wild thing measures a man, not afraid, not trusting, just measuring. Sometimes his eyes lingered on the beaded pouch I'd set on the shelf. I wondered if it was his, or if it had been pressed into his palm by a hand now gone. I'd seen beadwork like that in other years, simple rows, colors chosen because they meant something before they pleased the eye. Medicine, memory, a name you carry without saying. The wind laid down toward noon and came back near dusk, rattling the stovepipe and humming in the chinks. I cut kindling and stacked it crosswise in the box the way my wife used to, though I still don't know why her way burns longer than mine. The boy watched the axe rise and fall. He didn't flinch at the crack. When I set the axe aside, he glanced at my hands like he was counting the scars. After the war, I worked as a scout a while, before I came out here where a man's mistakes bleach quiet in the Sunday. You learn things scouting that don't leave you. How to read a ridge for sign. How to tell the difference between the tracks of a man who's hunting and a man who's hungry. How to let silence answer what your mouth shouldn't ask. Somewhere on those long days I learned another thing, that the land remembers. It remembers the feet that pressed it down and the fires that warmed it. It remembers what was taken and what was given. There are places that keep their grudges and places that forgive if you work them patient. I cleaned the boy's hands again that evening and saw the dirt give way to small crescents of clean under each nail. The bruises on his arms had lifted to that sickly yellow that means the blood is backing away. He tried a strip of bread softened in broth and kept it, and I let myself breathe in a way I hadn't since I'd found him by the fence. I didn't press him for a name. Names come when a thing is ready to stay. Questions don't warm a room. By the second night his lips carried color again. He gripped my coat like it was the last piece of the world worth holding. Once, half asleep, his hand found the beaded pouch on the shelf, then fell back. I thought of the hands that tied those beads and of the road between that hand and this small body in my house. The thought sat on my chest like a boot. Toward morning the fire went to coals and held. I dozed in the chair and woke with that old, unwelcome clarity, the kind that tells you a change is near because the world has gone too quiet to be safe. Outside, the wind shifted. It brought the faintest smear of something I hadn't smelled since the roundup smoke, not my own. A little sweet with grease, not far, not near. Somewhere a mile or two east, where the wash widens under the ridgeline. It might have been travelers. It might have been nothing. The land carries old fires in its clothes. Still, I sat up and set a fresh stick on the coals and turned the damper down like a man keeping his breath under him. The boy slept through, small and tight and stubbornly living. When he woke, he cupped his hands around the steam of the tin and took careful sips. He stood on bare feet by the stove and looked at the door as if weather were a thing you could call by staring. I set my coffee down. "Someone coming for you?" I asked. Just that. He didn't answer. His fingers tightened around the tin. His gaze fixed on the door like the question had already been asked by the wind itself. He looked at the pouch, then at the door again, and I saw something in his eyes I recognized from men at the edge of a fight, not fear exactly, not hope, just readiness to accept whatever name the next minute would give him. I'm not built for coaxing. I let the quiet sit where it wanted. The stove ticked. The mule blew once in the pen and settled. A high hawk wrote a single line on the pale sky and was gone. I patched a weak board on the lean-to and checked the roof where the snow likes to settle heavy as a grudge. I cut wedges for the fence post I'd found loose and set them straighter than they'd been in months. When a man can't move the big things, he turns his hand to what he can, and sometimes that's enough to keep the bad thoughts from taking root. By late day, the light went the color of old bone, and the hills took on that deep quiet they wear before cold. I put a pot of beans to a slow roll and set a strip of pork to lend them courage. The boy ate 3 spoonfuls, then a 4th, and didn't balk when I wiped a line of broth from his chin with the back of a finger. The change in him wasn't loud. It was in the way he set the tin without searching for a place to put it, the way he watched the room like the corners belonged to him, too. Night came quick, as it does when the wind is up. I pulled the chair close to the stove and let the heat find the aches in my knees. The rifle lay across my lap because habit is a hard-mouthed mule, not because I expected the kind of trouble that rifle solves. Outside, the wind shouldered itself along the boards and found no purchase. The boy curled with his back to the fire, my coat over him, the beaded pouch close to his small fist. He slept. Sometime deep in that long hour when a man thinks too clean for comfort, the wind shifted again. I caught the thin lick of that other smoke and something else riding behind it, tallow, maybe, or wool, singed by a stray coal. I thought of cattle camps and army fires, of cooking stones and sagebrush, of the way a woman will bank coals so the morning comes easier. I told myself it could be any of those. The telling helped a little, but not enough to make me foolish. I set another stick on the coals and left the lamp turned low. I walked to the door and set my palm to the wood and felt the cold working on the grain like a file. Beneath that, I felt the small thrum of my own heart, steady as a tick. A man's heartbeat will tell him the truth if he lets it. Dawn is a stingy thing in winter. It gave us gray first, then a thin wash of pewter. The mule's ears went up before the light did, and she turned her head east so fast, her halter rang a small silver note. I took the kindling basket and stepped into the yard. The ridge held 3 figures in the pale light, still enough to let the wind do all the moving. Not big, not small women by the set of the shoulders, by the way the skirts answered the breeze, by the steadiness that says a person is here on purpose. They stood. I stood. Between us the yard lay emptied of every lie a man can tell himself. Behind me, I heard the boy stir, his breath change. I didn't wave. They didn't either. A hawk crossed the sky with one long stroke and was gone. I lifted a hand just enough to say I'd seen them and wasn't going to pretend otherwise. The wind took that small signal and put it where the country keeps such things. The question I'd asked him the night before answered itself. If you enjoy the story, hit that subscribe button right away. And if you don't, then just hit the like button anyway, to keep more Wild West love stories coming. It was just past dawn, before the sun had lifted clean over the ridgeline. The air still carried the gray of night, thin and cold enough to sting the inside of a man's nose. I had stepped outside to fetch kindling when the mule snorted sharp and backed away from the fence, ears pinned tight. She only did that when something didn't fit. I followed her gaze. There, in the pale half-light, stood 3 figures on foot. They were still as stones on the rise above the cabin, silhouettes cut against the paling sky. Women, Apache by the braid of their hair and the fall of their skirts. The wind tugged at the hems, but they did not move. Even from that distance, I could see their breath hanging in the air. A cold knot pulled in my gut. I looked back at the cabin where the boy still slept, then turned again to face them. They were worn. That was the first thing I noticed, not just tired from travel, but worn in the bones. Their moccasins were cracked and crusted with old mud. Deerskin dresses, once carefully stitched with beads and shells, hung in tatters, patched in places with scraps of hide, loose in others where seams had given way. One carried a bundle strapped tight across her back, the weight of it bending her shoulders. Another wore a hunting knife tied to her belt with a strip of cloth, handle wrapped so many times it looked more like a memory than a weapon. Their cheeks were wind-burned raw, their arms thin from long hunger. The one in front stepped forward alone. She was broader in the shoulders than the other 2, older, stronger, her braids streaked faint with gray at the temples, her eyes fixed on mine, steady as rifle sights. When she spoke, her voice was low and even, no tremor in it. You have our son. Not a threat, not an accusation, just fact, set down like a card on the table. My jaw clenched. The boy had said nothing in the days he'd been here, but the signs had been all around the beadwork, the way his eyes clung to the door, the bruises on his arm. This woman, this mother, had been searching for him. Maybe for days, maybe longer. I let the silence hang a beat. My pulse stayed steady, but every inch of me had gone taut. 3 strangers on my doorstep in winter Apache. No less meant risk. I'd learned that long ago. Yet I also knew what it meant to lose someone and to follow their ghost across miles of empty country, praying each track in the dirt led somewhere. I lifted my chin. He's inside, I said. Still asleep. She gave a single nod, then waited. I hesitated at the door. The safe thing would have been to send them on, to tell them I'd found him and done my part, nothing more. But safe had left me the night I pulled the boy off the frozen ground. I stepped back. Come in. They moved without sound. No questions, no wasted words. When they entered the cabin, the warmth struck them full in the face. Shoulders stiffened, breath caught in throats. The eldest crossed the floor at once and dropped to her knees beside the cot. The boy stirred at the shift of air, blinked, then his eyes lit like coals catching flame. He scrambled into her arms without a sound, burying his face deep into the hollow of her chest. She wrapped herself around him, hands clutching his back, head bent so low her lips brushed his hair. The other two women held back near the wall. One was younger, no more than 20, hair loose around her shoulders, eyes sharp and restless as she scanned the corners of the cabin and the yard beyond the window. The other clung close to her side, slender, shoulders stooped, lips pressed tight as if holding back words she would never say. The boy did not cry, neither did the mother. They only held each other, and in that silence I felt the weight of days spent searching. I poured water into a tin cup and slid it across the table. Then I opened the larder, brought out what little I had left: jerky, hard bread, a handful of beans. I set it near the stove. Eat. They didn't move right away. At last, the eldest reached up, broke a piece of bread, placed it into the boy's hand, then shared with the others. They ate slow, deliberate, chewing each bite as though it might be the last for a long while. When they had taken the edge off their hunger, the eldest looked up at me again. "I am Naya." I gave a short nod. "Caleb." Her gaze did not waver. "Why did you help him?" Not angry, not grateful either, just wanting to understand. I rubbed the back of my neck. Didn't feel right leaving him. For the first time, a flicker passed her face, something softer, too brief to name. "No," she said quietly. "It wouldn't have been." The fire snapped in the silence. The boy curled against her, already half asleep again, his thin hand clutching the beaded pouch I'd placed on the shelf. That night, they stayed. I made no speeches, no promises. I laid out extra furs near the stove, added more wood to the fire, and kept the water pot filled. Routine carried me through what my mind hadn't sorted yet. I cleaned my rifle before bed as I always did, barrel gleaming in the firelight. But when I looked up, the room had changed. The cabin was no longer empty. The scrape of spoons against tin, the rustle of skirts by the fire, the steady breaths of those who had lived too long in the cold, it all settled into the walls like the place had been waiting for them. For the first time in years, that didn't feel like a threat. It felt like the start of something I hadn't expected. Morning came gray and dry, the kind that carries no warmth despite the sun rising over the ridge. I stood by the stove, splitting wood into the firebox. The kettle rattled faint against the iron. My shoulders ached from another night in the chair, but I kept it to myself. Behind me, the boy lay curled near the fire, bundled in furs. His mother, Naya, knelt beside him. She hadn't slept much. That was plain from the hollows under her eyes. Her braid was still tight, though dust clung to the ends. Her deerskin dress was frayed and patched, but her posture spoke of strength. One hand rested on the boy's back. The other lay still on her thigh, steady as stone. The younger woman, Liana, kept to the shadows near the wall, sharp eyes never resting, as though danger might step through the door any moment. Elara, the softer one, stood near the window, her thin frame angled to the pale light. Her face carried the look of someone who had stopped expecting good things. I watched them all over the rim of my mug. My cabin had never held this much life, not even when my wife was still alive. I wasn't used to the company, the breathing of others filling the air, yet I hadn't asked them to leave either. That truth sat heavy in my chest. "I need to check the fence," I said finally. The words came out flat, almost an excuse. No one answered. Only Naya tilted her head slightly, enough to show she'd heard me. I pulled on my coat, holstered the rifle, and stepped into the cold. The door thudded shut behind me, and the sound of it seemed to mark a line I couldn't step back across. If you like Wild West love stories or Wild West stories, drop a bunch of 1 second and your place in the comments for the Wild West Love channel. Tell me where you're listening from so I don't feel so alone out here. The fence line was a quarter-mile walk from the cabin. The wind swept across the hard-pan earth as if it meant to strip the world bare. I walked with my collar up and gloves stiff on my hands, checking each post one by one. Some wire had slackened, one corner rubbed raw by a deer or maybe a coyote. I drove in a splint, twisted the wire taut, breath fogging in front of me. But my mind wasn't on the work. It kept circling back to Naya's words the night before. "You have our son, not my son, not the boy, our." It hinted at something more than blood, a bond forged from survival. Maybe they weren't all kin by blood. Maybe they were what remained of something bigger, a camp, a band, a community shattered and scattered. I had seen it before. In '64, when I scouted for the Union, Arizona territory bled with such stories. Camps burned out, families broken, children hidden under brush while soldiers rode through. I'd seen both sides of the ugly truth, what men in uniform did to Apache families, and what came back in return. I never spoke of it, but the memories clung like burrs. Looking at that boy, at Naya and the women, I knew they'd survived the same storm, and now they were in my home. When I returned near midday, the smell of beans hit me before I stepped inside. Ilara was at the stove, moving careful, as though each stir might decide whether the pot would last one meal or two. The boy sat cross-legged beside her, chewing slow on a strip of bread, his face less sunken than before, eyes brighter. Liana still kept herself sharp as a drawn knife. She stood near the wall, back straight, gaze sweeping the room, then the window, then me. Her dress, shorter than the others, revealed legs hardened by miles of walking, bare feet cracked and bleeding from cold. I caught myself staring, not from want but worry. "You're welcome to boots," I said. "Got extra. Might not fit, but better than that." Liana's mouth tightened. She didn't answer. But Naya, seated near the cot, looked up and gave me a single nod. "We'll take care of our own." I didn't push it, just poured myself a mug of coffee, leaned in the doorway, and let my eyes adjust to a cabin that had never held so many before. Not even when my wife and I first settled here. Back then, it had been a place for dreams, for plans, for a life cut short. After she passed, silence had filled every board. Now the air moved differently. More plates at the table, more wood on the fire. The place felt lived in again, though I hadn't asked for it. I thought of asking how long they planned to stay, but I didn't. Because once you speak such things aloud, they turn real, and I wasn't sure I wanted that reality. That evening, the light faded early, the hills turning blue before dark. Naya rose, draped my coat over her shoulders, the one she'd returned to me folded and brushed clean, and stepped outside without a word. I followed at a distance, not too close, not too far. She stopped by the creek bed where the reeds bent in the wind. She knelt by a cluster of stones, murmured something in her own tongue, breath rising and falling in measured rhythm. I didn't understand the words, but I understood the weight of them. When she stood, she turned. Her eyes weren't wet, but they were heavy. "You didn't ask what happened to us," she said. I shook my head. "Didn't think you'd tell me if I did." She nodded once. "We hid the boy during a raid, covered him with brush. We ran. Took us days to find the place again. And when we did, there was nothing left." The words hung in the cold air. "You came a long way," I said. "Yes." I hesitated, then said, "You're safe here." She didn't thank me, didn't soften. She just looked at me with something unreadable respect, maybe, or caution. Then she walked past me, her torn dress brushing my leg. That night, no one asked for space. The boy curled against Naya under the furs. Ilara stretched beside the fire, her breathing soft. Liana sat cross-legged near the window, my coat draped across her knees, eyes half closed but still sharp. I sat in the chair, rifle across my lap. The cabin had never been so full, and for the first time in years, that didn't feel like intrusion. It felt like a weight I might be able to carry. The days turned colder. Morning started before light, frost crawling the window edges. I rose early, but I wasn't alone anymore. There were the boys' soft breaths, Ilara's joints cracking as she stood, always first after me. Liana lingered, eyes half open, watching. Naya stayed closest to the boy, her arm across him like a promise she meant to keep. The cabin felt smaller now, not in a bad way, just filled. The wood creaked under more footsteps, the kettle emptied faster, firewood disappeared twice as quick. No one complained. Each of them worked in rhythm, moving with the instinct of people who knew what survival required. Silence, routine, making use of every scrap. That morning, I pulled on my coat, opened the door, and the wind rushed in sharp and dry, howling across the yard, stirring the cattle in the pen. I stepped outside, and Naya followed, barefoot in worn moccasins, arms pulled tight across her chest. Without thinking, I shrugged off my coat and handed it to her. She hesitated, pride flashing in her eyes. "Take it," I said. "I'm moving." "You're not." She reached, fingers brushing mine, warm skin against calloused hands. She pulled the coat over her shoulders, stood still for a moment, looking at me with an expression that softened just enough. "You give away your coat too easy," she said. I shrugged. "Only got one of you standing there shivering." For the first time, I saw her almost smile. We walked to the corral together. I showed her how I checked the gate, ran a hand along the mule's flank, scooped oats into the trough, and scraped frozen mud to check the drainage. She didn't ask to help, but when the feed sack slipped, she caught it and held it open. Her hands were bare, fingers red from cold. "You use horses?" I asked. "Not your kind," she answered. "Ours were smaller, faster." "Could use the help," I said. She didn't reply, but she stayed. Back inside, Ilera was stirring a thin stew, coaxing flavor from salted pork and onions. The boy sat upright, brighter each day, dragging a stick along the hearthstones as though it were a toy. Liana kept her place by the window, eyes sharp, her hand turning a small leather pouch over and over. I took my chair, muscles aching from the cold. I watched them, 3 women, a boy, and myself, all crammed into walls meant for one. The cabin sounded different now. Not silence, not ghosts. People. And though I didn't say it, part of me knew. Winter was only beginning, and with it, the tests that would show whether we could survive together. Because out there, beyond the fence and the corral, the wind carried more than snow. I had smelled it before, smoke, not my own, faint but present. Somewhere, someone else was moving through this country, and if they found their way here, I wasn't sure yet whether the fire in this cabin would be enough to keep us safe. "Hey there, friend, take a moment and get yourself a full glass of water. It's easy to forget, but staying hydrated is crucial for your health. Also, if you've been sitting for a while, do a quick lap around the room and give your eyes a break from the screen. Your body will thank you." That night, after a meal of rabbit stew and hard bread, the cabin held its quiet differently. Not the hollow quiet I'd known for years, but the heavy, breathing kind that comes when people share a small space and let the fire do most of the talking. Ilara sat with her head bent, stitching a tear in Liana's sleeve. The boy curled against Naya's lap, his thumb near his mouth, eyes drifting closed though he fought to stay awake. I sharpened my knife slow, steel, whispering against stone. The sound filled the gaps where words didn't. Naya's hand stroked the boy's hair. Her voice came steady, without warning. "He needs a father." The blade paused in my hand. My eyes lifted, met hers. I hadn't expected her to put it plain. "I'm not asking you for anything," she added, as if she'd read the set of my shoulders. "I'm only saying he needs one." I leaned back, stared at the fire. The wood popped. A coal fell and flared bright. "He'll grow into his own." "Maybe," she said. "But boys without men to follow, they grow wild or they grow hard, sometimes both." I didn't answer right away. My chest tightened in the old way it did when memory pressed too close. At last I said, "I'm not much for talking, never was." "You don't have to talk," she said. Her gaze stayed on the boy, her hand smoothing his hair. "Just stay." Later, after the others had settled, I stayed awake near the stove. The fire had burned down to coals, red eyes watching the room. The wind outside had softened to a murmur, snow tapping faint at the window pane. Naya came up beside me. She moved quiet, wrapped in my coat, bare feet careful on the wood floor. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her hand brushed my shoulder, rested there. I didn't move. I closed my eyes and let it stay. For the first time in 6 years, I let another presence close without bracing against it. No promises were made, no declarations, but something locked tight inside me shifted, just enough to let breath in. The days passed slower in deep winter. Each one carried more weight. The snow didn't lift, it hardened, froze into ridges against the cabin walls, drifted high against the fence posts. I kept paths shoveled, animals fed, traps checked. My hands stayed raw. My breath never stopped fogging in the air. But I worked steady, because now there was more than myself to keep alive. Inside, warmth held. though barely. The stove burned near constant. Ilara rationed wood with a quiet wisdom, stretching every log by mixing it with small sticks. She and Liana moved in rhythm. No words needed. They just did what survival required. Naya no longer stood apart. She was beside me now, not clinging, not asking, just there. In the stable, lifting water buckets. In the yard, brushing snow from the mule's back. By the fire, threading new straps from old leather while I whittled. Sometimes our shoulders grazed when we passed. She didn't move away, and neither did I. One morning I stepped out to check the snares. Fresh snow had fallen in the night, clean and unbroken except it wasn't. A trail cut through the drifts, not ours. Boot prints, half filled by wind, leading along the tree line and fading east. My gut tightened. I followed a ways, enough to see where someone had paused, crouched by a pine. The snow there was blackened, faint with ash, a small fire, no more than a day old. I turned back, every step heavy. When I entered the cabin, Naya's eyes found mine. She saw something in my face before I said a word. "There are men," she said, not asking. "Tracks," I answered, "and fire." "Not far." Liana straightened, her hand going to the knife at her belt. Ilara pulled the boy closer without thinking. "We've been followed before," Naya said. Her voice was calm, but the edge in it carried weight. I nodded once. "We keep the fire low tonight. No light through the cracks." The boy's eyes widened. He clutched the pouch tight to his chest. That evening, I sat cleaning the rifle by the stove. The women moved around me, Ilara sewing, Liana sharpening her blade, Naya settling the boy into furs. Each sound was measured, each glance toward the door longer than it ought to be. Naya came to stand near me, her eyes on the latch. "You think they'll come here?" "Hard to say," I answered. "Could be trappers, could be worse." Her hand brushed the door frame, fingers tracing the wood grain. "The men who burned our camp, they won't come this far on foot. But if they sold word, they won't chase what they think is already dead," I cut in. She looked at me. "You don't know that." "No," I admitted, "but I've seen the kind. They don't waste their hunger on ghosts." For a moment she studied me, the firelight on her face making the hollows deep, her eyes unreadable. Then she let her hand fall. "You're not alone here," I said. She turned slow, the fire behind her throwing her shape into gold and shadow. My coat draped her frame, slipping from one shoulder, bare skin catching the light down to her collarbone. She didn't pull it up. "You didn't ask for this," she said. "No one did." "Still," she whispered, stepping closer, "you didn't close your door." The words landed heavy. She stood before me now, the scent of earth and smoke on her skin. "You lost someone," she said. "My wife," I answered after a long pause. 6 years ago. Pneumonia." Her eyes lowered. "I lost everyone in one night." The fire popped. The boy shifted in his sleep, sighing. We didn't speak for a long while. The silence wasn't empty. It was full. At last, Naya reached for a stick, adjusted the fire. Her arm brushed mine. She didn't move away. Neither did I. Later, when the others had gone to their blankets, she stayed. Saturday beside me, thigh against mine, head tipping to my shoulder. The rifle lay forgotten across my knees. For the first time in years, I didn't shift away. And though danger pressed close outside the cabin walls, inside, something else had begun, fragile, unspoken, but real. If you're watching on television, don't hesitate, grab your phone and hit subscribe to my channel so you'll never miss out on our amazing characters. SW.O. The thaw came quiet, the kind a man feels in his bones before he sees it with his eyes. At first it was only the sound, soft dripping from the eaves, a hush different from the hiss of snow. Then came the smell of wet earth, heavy with pine and dust, rising as the sun pushed through the gray. I stood on the porch with a shovel in hand, steam lifting off the roof in thin streams. The path to the barn had turned to mud, slick under my boots. For the first time in months, birds cut across the yard, low, swooping swallows darting, as if they'd been waiting for a signal. Inside, the cabin looked different. The furs were folded in neat stacks instead of scattered. The cracked window pane had been patched with a square of oiled canvas, sewn by Liana's steady hand. The larder, once a bare shelf, was now ordered, each jar and sack placed with care. The boy Kai, as Naya finally whispered his name one night, no longer slept, curled against the stove. He had a woven mat near the corner, small but his. Alara had insisted. Warmth alone is not enough, she had said. A child needs a place. Kai had begun calling her auntie in his own tongue. Sometimes she smiled when he did, the first softness I'd seen break through her worn face. I moved slower these days, not from age, but from a kind of awareness. I noticed things I used to pass by, the way Liana no longer kept a knife hidden in her blanket, the way Alara hummed old tunes when she cooked, the way Naya's shoulders eased when Kai laughed. And I noticed her touches her palm on my chest in the mornings, her fingers brushing my arm when she passed. She never asked for more, but each touch spoke louder than words. That evening, the sky burned orange at the edges. Naya stood by the fence, arms crossed, hair loose over her shoulders. Her dress had been mended fully now, pulled snug at the waist with a new leather belt I'd given her. It framed her figure, but what struck me more was how she stood not as a wanderer anymore, but as someone claiming ground. I stepped beside her, matched her stance. "Roof's going to need retarping," I said. She tilted her head. "So we stay long enough for that?" I gave a small nod. Her eyes swept the mountains. "Do you think others made it out from our camp?" I was quiet, a long moment. "Some, maybe not many." Naya drew a breath, slow through her nose, then let it out. "We lived," she said. "That should mean something." "It does." She turned to me. "I want this to be more than shelter, Caleb. I want roots, not just survival." I met her gaze steady. "Then stay. Plant them here." She stepped close, body pressing against mine, hand resting on my chest. Her voice dropped. "I want to share your bed." I didn't answer with words. I leaned down slow, sure, kissed her deep and steady. Her hand slid up my neck, her breath catching. That night she joined me beneath the firs, not hurried, not desperate. Our bodies fit like they'd been waiting through the long winter. We didn't speak, just breathed, moved together, stayed. When it was over, she lay with her head on my shoulder, fingers tracing the scar along my ribs. "I don't need promises," she whispered. "You've got more than that," I said. In the morning, Liana saw us through the doorway, curled together. She didn't speak, only set the water pot on the table softer than I'd ever seen her move. Days stretched longer as snow pulled back. Mud lined the fence posts, but green shoots poked through, stubborn against the cold. Kai followed me to the barn each morning, dragging a stick he called his rifle, mimicking my steps. He didn't ask questions, he just learned by doing. When I fixed the gate, he held the nails. When I brushed the mule, he copied my stroke. His laughter carried across the yard like something I hadn't known I missed. Inside, life settled into rhythm. Ilara rationed what food we had left, stretching beans with wild roots. Liana finally took the boots I offered. She didn't thank me, but one night I saw her by the fire, rubbing tallow into the leather like she meant to keep them a long while. Naya moved with purpose now. She tended the boy, but also the place itself. She helped me stack wood, patched gaps in the walls, set her hands to every task without being asked. She wasn't passing through anymore. One afternoon, I found myself standing before the mantel. For years it had held only one thing, the photograph of my wife, edges curled, frame worn by dust. I lifted it, set it carefully to the side. In its place, I put the beaded pouch Kai had carried cleaned, stitched by Naya's hand. No one asked why. They saw, and they knew. That night, we all ate together at the table, not scattered but gathered. Kai sat between Naya and Alara, tearing bread in small bites. Liana kept her knife at hand, but her shoulders had eased. For the first time, I realized the cabin wasn't a bunker anymore. It was a home. Spring broke sudden. One morning the creek swelled with melt, rushing strong enough to carry logs. The hillsides flushed green. The air softened, smelling of sage and new grass. I walked the ridge with Naya beside me, Kai chasing grasshoppers in the field below. "You never asked what I wanted," Naya said. "I figured you'd tell me if you did." She looked at me, steady. "I want to stop running. I want Kai to grow without fear. I want Leanna to sleep without her knife, and Alara to hum without looking over her shoulder, and her voice softened, I want to wake beside someone who sees me, not as a burden, not as a debt, but as his. I reached for her hand. You have that now. She studied me long. You mean that? I nodded. I would not have let you stay if I didn't. She placed my hand on her waist, not to tempt, but to bind. Then it's settled, she whispered. By summer, the land had changed. Fences mended, roof patched, the field tilled for planting. The cabin no longer sounded empty. It rang with footsteps, with laughter, with the quiet hum of voices that trusted the walls to hold them. For 6 years, I had lived with nothing but silence and ghosts. Now, when I opened the door at dawn, I heard Kai's laugh, Elara's song, Liana's steady voice, and Naya's breath at my side. The man I had been, the one who thought his life ended with his wife's last breath, was gone. What stood in his place was something new, not whole, not unscarred, but alive again. And in that truth, I found my home. Today's story is about pains that seemed to have no way out until a small ray of light changed everything. Do you believe that, even in the darkest times, there's always a miracle waiting at the end of the road? And if deep down you still believe that God is watching over you, quietly arranging everything, then right now, leave a comment, Amen, below this video. Because who knows, at the very moment you write it, a blessing may quietly find its way into your life.